The world holds its breath, gripped by a sense of unease that stretches from the corridors of power to the living rooms of ordinary people. In capitals across the globe, leaders and citizens alike are glued to their screens, watching events unfold in real time, aware that the decisions made in the coming days could shape the future for years to come. As the Persian Gulf simmers with tension on July 18, 2025, the region's tranquil surface belies the storm brewing beneath. Warships from multiple nations cut through the waters, their presence a stark warning that peace is hanging by a thread. The world's most vital shipping lanes are now shadowed by the threat of conflict, and every movement is watched with apprehension. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, is once again the epicenter of a global crisis. This slender passage, through which a fifth of the world's oil supply flows, has become the focal point of international anxiety. Its strategic importance cannot be overstated. Any disruption here sends ripples across continents. Last month's brief but brutal war between Iran, Israel and the US has pushed Tehran to threaten closure of this vital choke point. The scars of that conflict are still fresh, and the world is wary of another escalation. The memory of missile strikes, naval skirmishes and diplomatic standoffs lingers, fueling fears that the worst may be yet to come. Just yesterday, Iran's Revolutionary Guard seized a foreign oil tanker, making clear their willingness to disrupt global commerce. The dramatic images of masked commandos boarding the vessel have sent shockwaves through the shipping industry, and insurance rates for vessels in the region have soared overnight. The message from Tehran is unmistakable. They are prepared to act decisively, regardless of the consequences. Tehran's parliament has declared the military fully ready for a blockade. The halls of government echo with fiery speeches, and the streets of Tehran are filled with both patriotic fervor and anxious uncertainty. Military convoys move through the city, and the world wonders if the next step will be a point of no return. The underlying causes, Iran's nuclear ambitions and the international response, remain unresolved, leaving the world economy on edge. Years of negotiations, sanctions and threats have failed to produce a lasting solution. The nuclear issue is a powder keg, and every new development adds fuel to the fire, making compromise seem ever more elusive. The Strait of Hormuz is the artery for a significant portion of the world's energy. Its closure would trigger an economic heart attack. Every day, millions of barrels of oil and gas pass through these waters, powering cities, industries, and economies far beyond the Middle East. A single act of aggression here could send energy prices skyrocketing, disrupt supply chains, and plunge markets into chaos. Every nation from the US to China and Europe would feel the shockwaves. The interconnected nature of global trade means that a crisis in the Gulf would not remain confined to the region. Factories could grind to a halt, transportation costs could soar, and millions of jobs could be at risk. The stakes are nothing less than the stability of the global economy. This small stretch of water is a stark reminder. A regional conflict here can instantly become a global crisis. The world's dependence on this fragile corridor is a vulnerability that no nation can ignore. As diplomats scramble for solutions and military forces stand ready, the balance between war and peace hangs in the balance. The world watches, waiting for the next move. In homes, offices, and government buildings, eyes remain fixed on the Persian Gulf, hoping for a breakthrough, fearing a misstep, and knowing that history could be written in the days ahead. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow, 21-mile-wide channel separating Iran from Oman. This slender waterway, though small in size, holds immense strategic significance for the entire world. It forms the only sea passage from the oil-rich Persian Gulf to the open ocean, making it a vital artery for the global economy. The geography here is unforgiving. Steep coastlines, rocky outcrops, and shallow waters all combine to create a natural choke point that has shaped the region's history for centuries. Its shipping lanes are just 2 miles wide in each direction, a natural bottleneck for global trade. Every vessel, from massive oil tankers to small cargo ships, must carefully navigate these narrow corridors. The slightest miscalculation or disruption can have ripple effects across continents, instantly impacting the flow of goods and energy. About 20% of the world's daily oil supply, and a third of its liquefied natural gas, pass through here. That's millions of barrels of oil and vast quantities of gas, fueling economies from Asia to Europe and beyond. The sheer volume of energy resources funneled through this narrow strait is staggering, making it one of the most important maritime passages on the planet. There is no alternative route. The world's energy architecture depends on this passage. If Hormuz were to close, tankers would be forced to take much longer, costlier routes, if any exist at all. This dependency makes the strait a single point of failure for global energy security. Iran, controlling the northern coast, wields enormous leverage by threatening closure. The country's strategic position allows it to monitor and, if necessary, disrupt the flow of ships. This power has been used as a bargaining chip in regional and international politics, heightening tensions and uncertainty. The U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet is stationed nearby to ensure freedom of navigation, creating a tense standoff. Their constant patrols are a visible reminder of the high stakes involved, as both sides remain on alert for any sign of escalation. The presence of advanced warships and surveillance aircraft underscores just how critical this waterway is to global stability. Dozens of massive oil tankers transit these waters daily, making them high-value targets. Each ship carries not just cargo, but the economic lifeblood of nations. The vulnerability of these vessels to attack or blockade adds another layer of risk to an already volatile region. A closure would trap fleets and halt billions in trade, turning geography into a source of global insecurity. The consequences would be immediate and severe. Energy prices would skyrocket, supply chains would be disrupted, and the world would be reminded of just how fragile our interconnected systems truly are. Hormuz is both a marvel of efficiency and a permanent flashpoint. Its geography has made it indispensable, but also dangerously exposed, a place where the world's thirst for energy meets the realities of power, politics, and geography. The Strait of Hormuz has long been a flashpoint, most notably during the 1980s tanker war, when Iran and Iraq targeted each other's shipping. The U.S. and other navies intervened to keep oil flowing, setting a precedent for global involvement. Since then, Iran has repeatedly used the threat of closure as a deterrent against sanctions and foreign pressure. Seizures of foreign vessels, like the 2019 capture of the Stena Impero, are calculated reminders of Iran's capabilities. These incidents keep shipping and insurance industries on edge, proving Iran's threats are not empty. The U.S. and allies have learned to maintain a robust military presence, while Iran refines its asymmetric tactics. Decades of mistrust make peaceful de-escalation difficult and the risk of conflict ever present. Iran cannot match the U.S. Navy conventionally, so it relies on asymmetric warfare. Its arsenal includes anti-ship ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, naval mines, and swarms of attack drones. The Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, using Iranian tactics, showed how a few strikes can disrupt global shipping and spike insurance costs. Iran's fast attack craft and suicide drones can overwhelm larger ships in the Strait's confined waters. Naval mines make passage perilous, while missile barrages threaten even the most advanced warships. This layered defense makes Iran's threat to close Hormuz very real. The world has seen how quickly limited attacks can cause massive economic disruption. The risk is not just political, it's a credible military danger to global trade. For the United States, the Strait of Hormuz is not just a narrow waterway, it's a strategic dilemma that sits at the heart of global energy security and American foreign policy. This slender passage, only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, is the world's most critical oil choke point. Every day, millions of barrels of oil and natural gas flow through these waters, fueling economies from Asia to Europe and beyond. Any disruption here could send shockwaves across the globe, making the strait a perpetual flashpoint for tension and conflict. The U.S. Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain, stands as a visible symbol of America's enduring commitment to keeping the Strait of Hormuz open and secure. The fleet's presence reassures allies and deters adversaries, projecting power across the region and ensuring that vital shipping lanes remain free from obstruction. If the strait were ever closed, whether by accident, design, or escalation, it would not only challenge U.S. credibility on the world stage, but would almost certainly trigger a swift and forceful military response. The stakes are high, and the margin for error is razor thin. Even though the U.S. now imports far less oil from the Gulf than in decades past, a sudden supply shock would still send global energy prices soaring. American consumers would feel the pain at the pump, and the ripple effects would be felt throughout the economy, from transportation to manufacturing and beyond. For America's allies in Europe and Asia, the consequences could be even more severe. Many of these nations are far more dependent on Gulf energy, and a disruption would create immediate political and security headaches for Washington, straining alliances and complicating diplomatic efforts. The interconnected nature of the world's energy markets means that a crisis in the Strait of Hormuz would not stay contained. It would reverberate through financial markets, disrupt supply chains, and potentially trigger a global recession. Any military action to reopen the strait would be fraught with risk and come at a tremendous cost. The threat of escalation into a wider regional war is ever present, with unpredictable consequences for both the U.S. and its partners. Defending against swarms of inexpensive missiles and drones, many of them supplied by regional actors, poses a daunting challenge. The cost of advanced defense systems quickly adds up, while the threat itself continues to evolve, making the task of protection both expensive and technically demanding. U.S. leaders must constantly weigh the need to deter aggression with the risk of being drawn into yet another protracted conflict in the Middle East. Every decision is a balancing act, with enormous stakes for regional stability and American interests. Diplomatic pressure, economic sanctions, and a robust military presence are all tools in the U.S. arsenal. Yet, as tensions rise and the margin for error narrows, the risk of a misstep grows ever more real. In this high-stakes environment, the risk of miscalculation and the outbreak of a major war remains dangerously high, making the Strait of Hormuz one of the world's most volatile and closely watched flashpoints. China, the world's largest oil importer, is acutely vulnerable to a Hormuz closure. Over 40% of its crude imports pass through the strait, making its economy highly exposed. Beijing's response would focus on urgent diplomacy, using its UN position and economic ties to push for de-escalation. China has invested in pipelines and alternative routes, but these can't replace Hormuz's volume. Its strategic reserves offer only a temporary buffer. China's navy lacks the reach to secure the strait, leaving it reliant on the U.S. to protect its energy lifeline. This dependence is a central paradox in today's global power dynamic. India, like China, is deeply exposed. Over 60% of its oil imports transit Hormuz. A blockade would trigger fuel shortages, inflation, and economic turmoil. India maintains diplomatic ties with Gulf states and has increased its naval presence to protect shipping. In crisis, it would push for energy diversification, but alternatives are limited and costly. The EU, while less dependent, would still face soaring prices and political instability, especially in southern and eastern states. Europe would likely join US-led maritime security efforts while pushing hard for diplomacy. For both India and Europe, a Gulf conflict means economic chaos and political risk. The stakes are global, and no major economy is immune. Even the threat of a Hormuz closure sends oil prices soaring and markets into turmoil. News of seizures or threats can spike prices by 10% in a day. A real closure would shatter records and trigger global inflation. Shipping insurance becomes unaffordable, stranding tankers and halting exports. There's no alternative route. Unlike the Red Sea, ships can't simply go around. Financial markets would panic, supply chains would seize up, and manufacturing costs would skyrocket. Central banks would face impossible choices between fighting inflation and avoiding recession. Developing nations would be hit hardest, with energy bills triggering debt crises and social unrest. The crisis exposes the fragility of our interconnected economy. A single choke point can hold the world hostage. The Hormuz crisis is a stark reminder. Energy security is global security. The world's dependence on this narrow waterway makes every nation vulnerable. The U.S. bears the burden of security, while China and India face the greatest economic risk. The EU seeks stability through diplomacy, but there's no easy solution. Military deterrence is necessary, but lasting peace requires addressing root causes, especially Iran's nuclear ambitions. The world must commit to dialogue, international law, and energy diversification. The quiet flow of tankers is not guaranteed. Its preservation is a shared responsibility. The current crisis is a wake-up call. Global stability depends on keeping Hormuz open.